All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to thank you for joining us today at the Lunch with the Leader series hosted by the Columbia Chamber of Commerce. I'm Heather Hargrove, and I'm with Stony Creek Hotel and Conference Center here in Columbia, and I currently serve as one of the co-chairs for Government Affairs. And my other co-chair is Joe Henderson with Central Bank of Boone County. So we'll just take a couple of moments here at the beginning to thank our sponsors. And our presenting sponsor for Lunch with the Leader series is Dave Griggs Flooring America. And Boone Supported Living is the location and catering sponsor. So let's give our sponsors a round of applause, please. And then I would like to invite our presenting sponsor, Michelle Beatty with Dave Griggs, to come forward with a few comments.
Hello everyone, I am Michelle Beatty with the President and owner of Dave Griggs Flooring America. Today we are happy to sponsor Lunch with the Leader and welcome Patrick McKenna with the Missouri Department of Transportation. With the Chamber, I serve as a board member on the Emerging Issues Committee and as past chair of Women's Network. And I know what a top priority transportation is to the Chamber and its members. Personally, from the moment my employees and clients leave their doors and travel on roads to our store until the moment that our products and services are completed in their houses and offices all through the state, we rely incredibly on our roads and bridges. I know you are all here because you too realize that and are eager to hear more about the opportunities and challenges of the future. So again, I want to thank you all for coming today. Dave Griggs Flooring America is so honored to support informative programs like today's Lunch with Leader. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now at this time we'll welcome Julie Walton with Boone Supported Living.
I don't really want to follow you. So I wanted to do something, I wanted to sponsor something so that I could get up and talk. But now I'm really nervous, so if you want really to have a real conversation with me afterward, that might be better. How many of you know somebody that has a child with a developmental disability? Autism, Down syndrome, like that. Those are the people I work with, those are the people I work for. So a lot of families don't know that there's help out there for that when their kid is maybe beyond what they can handle, or maybe they're aging and they've always had their child home with them, but what's going to happen if they outlive me? Those are the people that we want to work with. So I founded this business in 2007. We now have about 70 employees, and continue to grow because that need continues to grow. So Boone Supported Living, I guess is the name of us. And if you have questions, comments.
Okay, now we'd like to welcome our guest speaker for today. Patrick McKenna became the director of the Missouri Department of Transportation in December of 2015. As the director of MoDOT, he oversees all operations of the department. Prior to coming to Missouri, he served as the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. Mr. McKenna spent 13 years in Washington, D.C., working in the United States Senate, where he most recently served as the CFO. Mr. McKenna is Vice President of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials and is a member of its executive committee as well. He served as President of the Mid-America Association of Transportation Officials. He is a member of the executive committee for the National Academy of Sciences Transportation Research Board. It's a national group that provides innovative, research-based resolutions to improve transportation. TRB is a division of the National Research Council of the United States, which serves as an independent advisor to the President, Congress, and also federal agencies on scientific and technical questions of national importance. Mr. McKenna has a Bachelor of Science degree in Finance from Bentley College and a Master of Science in Management and Finance from the University of Maryland University College. He and his wife Suzanne have two sons, Patrick Jr. and Connor, and also a daughter, Kelsey. So please help us welcome Patrick McKenna.
Thank you, Heather. I guess I can still say good morning, so good morning. I'm really pleased to be here. You know, with that, I always get a little concerned about that. The little secret I'll tell you is in all those associations and everything that I work on, I'm the least technically competent competent person that walks into the room and all of those things. So I'm the one that asks all the questions nobody wants to ask. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I want to acknowledge the work that this chamber and chambers across the state did in the work to try to bring forward public awareness to transportation funding. The support of the chamber was outstanding, and what we have seen in the last couple of years is a growing sentiment, not only here in Missouri, but across the country, with the National Chamber of Commerce being right on board. And let's face it, we all know that it is not a typical stance for chambers of commerce to come forward with support for additional revenue measures for taxes. It has to make business sense for that to happen. And what we do know is that the cost of doing nothing far exceeds the cost of fixing the problem. So that we're in one of these atypical public policy voids that occurs. And what we experience as an agency and what we experience all across the country with needs in transportation investment are really very similar. They're the same issues across the country, and they're really twofold. The first is just the constant loss of purchasing power that occurs with inflation. Now that inflation for us on a system that is valued in replacement value here in Missouri, roads and bridges alone have a replacement value of about $125 billion. Now Missourians, through their taxation and user fees over the last 100 years, have built that. They put forward about $55 billion of investment. That replacement cost today is about $125 billion. And that replacement cost is one where, think of the complexity. We're trying to replace an aging infrastructure, never mind improve it for today's economic needs, but just trying to replace an aging infrastructure while everyone is using it is really quite a challenge. You know, if you think of the scale that we're dealing with, imagine if you had you inherited a home with a value of about $125,000. Now that's great, good news. So you drive out to the home, you go up the driveway, long, winding driveway. It's all cracked. Grass is a little high, needs to be mowed. You can see from the road, the roof probably needs a little repair. You get into the home, big home, 5, 6 bedrooms, but the kitchen has to be completely gutted, the bathrooms are out of shape, the electrical's not working. And so you find through that, you have a budget of $900 annually to take care of all of that, $900. And on top of that, when you start to repair, your in-laws move in, and they sit right in the kitchen and in the living room, and while you're doing the demo, not only will they not move, they get mad when you start doing something, because you're in their way. So that's kind of my job. On a scale of $125 billion of replacement with a $900 million capital program, that $900 million capital program is state resources through user fees matched with federal resources coming in through federal surface transportation. And the variable that we have to play with is that the work that we do, we can't just put in place overnight, because the work we do, and I think the advances that have occurred that are very good advances in transportation policy nationally, are that we consider the impacts of the work that we do. We work in concert and in partnership with the communities that we serve, so that the work we're doing fits the priorities that communities, as they are the experts, as you are the experts in developing your own community, we have to work in concert so that we are not impacting how you want your community to grow, how you want it to interact and intersect with the transportation network. And also we have to work with private landowners to consider the impact of private property should the state need to secure additional land, even just to do an interchange. It might be 100 feet. But those are privately owned. We have to deal with that. We have to work through that process. We have environmental impacts. We have no interest in harming the environment as we are working to replace this. So there are regulations and planning and requirements and permitting that we have to go through. We have to move or relocate utilities, and those are private enterprise enterprises or quasi-regulated enterprises that have great demands on their, only in government, only in Washington, would it take you 10 years to do something, and then what you'd call it when you finished would be the FAST Act. So the FAST Act is the Federal Surface Transportation Act that's currently in place, and that gave us a 5-year window to understand what the federal resources were. What we were able to do as soon as the FAST Act was passed is we put it in place with the leadership and support of the Missouri Highway and Transportation Commission, a plan to deficit spend, meaning we're spending more money today than comes in resources in order to draw all of those federal resources. That is a risk, but the risk of not pulling all the federal resources in on what becomes about a 4-to-1 match. We spend $1 on a project that's federally eligible. We pay a private contractor for the work that they're doing, and then we send the invoice to Washington, and they send us 80 cents back. So we have to have the cash on hand ahead of time, we have to manage that, but that reimbursement is one of the most critical things we do as a department from a fiduciary standpoint, to make sure that all the resources available at the national level are here in Missouri doing the work that needs to be done. So that basis of that money comes from gas taxes that are paid, the federal gas tax, both on regular and diesel, that goes to Washington and comes back through surface transportation authorization bills. Now that long-term bill that was passed 3.5 years ago is now a short-term bill. It only lasted through 2020. So the biggest wild card we are facing right now is what will happen at the federal level. And what we're doing, and this is something that will impact this community, but what we're trying to do, if you recall, several years ago, after a failure at the polls with Amendment 7, which was a statewide sales tax of 3/4 cents, that was the policy that came forward, went out to the polls, was rejected pretty heavily at the polls, kind of a 60-40 split. After that, the projections out of the variability of the federal program, combined with limited resources at the state level, looked like there was going to be a specific challenge being able to draw those federal funds in. And we did a capital planning. We run a capital plan on a 5-year basis. It's updated every year in June, but we plan for 5 years capital improvements. We program about 100% of the first 3 years so that communities know and can work with us to determine what those projects will be. And then the 4th and 5th year, we program at about 50% because there are variable conditions. We could have natural disasters that we have to respond to, and we have to be able to adjust funding and bring it forward. So that's the way we work it right now. The ability to kind of plan that out was limited, and we had a capital improvement outlook that was only going to bring about $300 million of construction projects a year. So that $900 that I talked about on the $125,000 home was actually $300 then. We worked pretty carefully to bring that up, but we're doing it on a deficit spend basis, and we have a $900 million capital program today. We're trying to sustain that, but the outlook on the federal side is that we might not have that full program going forward after 2020. So we're trying to calculate what we need to do. We're trying not to overreact to public rejection of additional investment. That's a hard thing for us to do as we try to plan the capital plans out. But in trying not to overreact, that what we're doing, and we're working now through our financial planning, a lot of people don't realize, but we do forecasts on all of the revenue measures that come in within the department. We forecast that out 1, 3, 5, 10, 20, and 40 years. Now, 40 years doesn't mean anything. That's attached to some of the federal requirements we have to really consider, population trends and how things are going to happen so that we can be navigating and working with communities toward those things. So we are bringing our capital planning forward with the notion that we're going to plan for Washington fixing the problem. Anybody a betting person here? We're going to plan for that because of the extraordinary amount of advanced work that is necessary to plan a program. But we're also projecting what the impact would be if there is no support for the Highway Trust Fund at the national level. And that we're looking at well over $300 million a year decline potential as we get into the year 2021 and beyond. So what we're gonna do when we come out and work with the planning, metropolitan planning organizations all over the state, is we're gonna plan for 2 statewide transportation improvement programs. One if everything works, and one if it doesn't. So we'll have the list of projects that we will have the answers of what we won't do if the federal program does not come forward. And in fact, I think that will help us making the case how critical it is to move that program forward. And we're working at the national level through the associations and things that were mentioned to make sure that that happens. We're working with Congress. We've already, through the National Association, we've already created 11 white papers on what states all across the country are looking for in a new surface transportation authorization bill. And we've deconstructed all of that into legislative language, and we've already forwarded it to the congressional staff for their consideration as we work forward in the coming Congress. So we're pretty actively engaged in that. What does the failure of Proposition D mean, though, and what does it mean for Columbia and for businesses here? I think the single biggest impact that is one that we talked about leading into Prop D. The single biggest impact, I would say, for here is the Rocheport Bridge. The Rocheport Bridge project, we have in our current financial plan, we have available resources to rehabilitate that bridge. Rehabilitating that bridge, when I first got here, I remember talking to Dave, the first time I looked in the out years on the STIP, I circled that, statewide transportation plan, and I said, you know, I recall even as many years ago when the '93 floods occurred, in my family, my wife's father was actually had the same role that Dave has here in Missouri as a district engineer for Southwest Virginia. And when he retired from that, he worked for FEMA and was out here in Missouri doing preliminary damage assessments. And he recalled the issue of the Rocheport Bridge being the single point of failure in the entire national transportation network getting across the river. And you know, the importance of that structure, not only to this community, but the entire state, and not only the state, but regionally and nationally, is really significant. And here's one of the challenges we have. So in our budget, we have approximately $15 million available to deal with that bridge. That bridge needs to be replaced. If we do a rehabilitation, that $15 million will probably get us somewhere between 8 and 10 years of useful life remaining on that bridge. And by age and condition, it's not one of the older bridges, but at 3,018 feet long. And with the extraordinary commercial vehicle use on that, the age and wear on that bridge, it needs replacement. We had just 18 months ago, well, about 2 years ago, we had severe issues with that. We had finger joints that sheared, and we had DeLong's, a wonderful contractor and steel manufacturer in Jefferson City, got to it. They actually manufactured replacements for those overnight, the night that it happened. Essentially, that finger joint is an expansion joint on the bridge, and when it sheared, it came up and created a real hazard. We had to close the lane. We had our crews out there were in tornado warnings and a hailstorm. Our crews are out there replacing that at night. Dave and his team, Mike Shue, who's our resident engineer, coordinated that effort, but our bridge maintenance crews were out there doing that. The closure of the Rocheport Bridge closes down I-70. The ability to rehabilitate that bridge would require a lane closure in each direction, east and westbound on I-70, for somewhere, if it's a miracle of execution, 7 months. If we think it's an actual, you know, normal construction, probably 9 to 10 months or longer, if everything goes well. And that's not just a lane drop at night, that's a permanent closure during that rehabilitation. That's the age and condition of the infrastructure. And you know, when you look at that, the traffic scenario and the impact of that is, on a good day, traffic backs up to here. That's a 3-hour backup. That's a good day. Bad day, it's going to back up to potentially as far as Kingdom City. 25 miles, 8 hours. 8 hours. what we know in the traffic modeling is that every week of that 9 months, we're gonna have good and bad days. And what we also know is that the impact and the cost of that delay far exceeds by multiples what citizens would have paid with a, at today's rates, paying under $2 a gallon for gas, the impact would have been somewhere about $1 a month to the average driver. That's what Proposition D at a 10-cent increase would have meant. Now, why, this isn't a big surprise, right? But what we have is a capital program that invests approximately half of what the needs of the system are, this $125 billion replacement cost. We are only funding half. And that is before we take into consideration what Columbia wants in terms of additional development. That's just on the need side. And why are we there? There are two primary factors that are doing this, and I mentioned the first one before, it's inflation. We run about 3% inflation in construction a year on average over the last 30 years. So with a $900 million capital program, whatever I don't do this year costs me $27 million more to do next year. And because we're only funding half, the stuff we're not getting to also is growing at about $27 million a year. So you've got $54 million a year impact on purchasing in a given year. Now, in a system where we're spending $900 million, a lot of people look at that and say, that's a lot of money. But most of the concerns and complaints about infrastructure come to us, it's what we're not getting to. It's what we're not able to do. And it's the things like Roachport, when we can't put out a capital plan for a $230 or $40 million bridge replacement without the money to do it. And that's really the shame of Prop D. It's also something we need to continue to look at and address because we all know that that's an unacceptable condition. It might be the reality of what we have to do with. My instructions to Dave and his team are to plan for the rehabilitation. Because if we're not planning for it, we'll have another finger joint shear, or we will have, what we do know is through age and use, the condition of that bridge will need to be closed at some point if we don't address it. So we have to be planning on a short-term basis with short money, because that's the responsible thing to do. We have to keep it available and safe. What we should be doing, but this is going to require more than just MoDOT figuring it out. This is a public policy issue. So the first issue is the rising inflation and the pressure against purchasing power. And Missourians have addressed that traditionally over the last 100 years. About once a decade, there's been a reset of the user fees. Because the user fees, like the gas tax, do not rise with the general economy the way income and sales taxes do. So we don't have any buffer against that inflationary pressure. And the second piece, which is becoming more problematic, it's a very good thing on a societal basis. We have rising fuel economy standards for the vehicles. So every time you go out and replace a 10-year-old pickup truck, it might have had 16 miles to the gallon before, you replace it with something that's getting 24 to 26. That's less revenue per mile driven. Now, it's a good thing for the environment. It's a good thing for the pocketbook of the individual that's dealing with it. But it's a key revenue source for transportation, and we have not addressed that. That is becoming as substantial or more than what inflation is doing. These are the two key policy issues that we have to address to counteract. We do have, just so you think we're not standing still here, we do have a proposal that has been supported thus far by Governor Parson. And I'd like to say Governor Parson and Lieutenant Governor Kehoe have been spectacular leading on this issue. Governor Parson, with all of his experience as an elected sheriff onto the House of Representatives, the state Senate, and as Lieutenant Governor, has led in this area, and he knows how much it impacts. And he's made this a signature issue for his tenure as governor, and he continues to support that. Disappointed with the outcome of Proposition D, but resolved nonetheless to continue to address this issue. And Lieutenant Governor Kehoe served prior to elected office as the chairman of the Missouri Highway and Transportation Commission, so he is intimately knowledgeable about the condition issues and the investment needs of the system. So with that, with that support and leadership, we have for now a couple of years had grants from Federal Highway to study alternatives to the fuel tax, to deal with this transition of a higher mileage vehicle and what it means for the core revenue. And what we're doing is we have studied the possibility of converting the state's registration fee, which is based on taxable horsepower, and to convert that to a mileage, a fuel economy standard. Very simple. A lot of people are talking about a complete conversion over to vehicle miles traveled. Now, we're not, as a nation, probably ready yet for that conversion, although something like that may well happen at the federal level. But think about it. We collect the federal gas tax not at the pump, but at the wholesale distributor level. So there are 875 approximately wholesale distributors in this nation that we collect federal gas tax from. There are 22 in this region, in Missouri, that we deal with. So think about the complexity we're talking about. We have to convert from collecting from 875 places to 256 million vehicles. That's not as simple as it would sound. And it's, and I know it doesn't sound simple, right? But it's also, you know, if you think about it and project it out, it could be quite costly as well. And we look for efficiency in collections. The collection of the gas tax right now is very efficient because it's been in place for a long time. The superstructure is in place, and that's something that occurs. Through our DMVs, our registration fees are also available, and the wherewithal to do this is also in place. So that conversion, rather than tracking people and how many miles they drive and everything, the conversion that we're proposing through this grant is literally just to say, you know, if you get under 29 miles per gallon, you have one rate. If you're between 30 and 60, there's another rate, and above that, there's another rate. The idea is to take the combination of what you pay for your travel with the fuel tax, combined with what you pay in the registration fee. So it doesn't matter if you're driving a 10-year-old pickup truck or a Tesla. You're going to be paying on parity. So it's essentially an equitable use of the system fee. And that's one of the things that we hope that the legislature would consider and debate. May take a little while for that to happen. This is a new concept. It's a concept that, quite frankly, could help us at the national level as well. Because what we really are looking for in policy, if all of a sudden one of the manufacturers came out with an $8,000 all-electric vehicle, what's everybody gonna buy, right? We could have a very substantial conversion to all-electric. Now, typically, with the vehicle fleet here in Missouri, we have about an 8% replacement a year, because most people that went out and bought a car can't just come in and replace right away. So there's a lag to the conversion, but it's coming. And just the rising fuel economy of normal vehicles is pretty substantial. Good for the environment, and good for people, and good for the pocketbooks, but bad for transportation investment. So we have to be able to transition, because whatever it comes down to, we cannot fix what we cannot fund. And we have extraordinary needs. There are critical needs for the development of Missouri, the development of Columbia, and the safety and reliability of the system itself. So I want to leave some time. I can go on about this topic all day. Poor Dave and Mike have to suffer through me all the time. So I wanted to leave some time for questions, and I know the program said that we're going through one, but I've been called back by, it's funny, you work in a position like this, and it's amazing how many people you work for. So it's somewhere around 6.3 million. Because what we've done is we've given out a government-issued ability to call me and complain about the roads. It's called the driver's license. So everyone has one, but it's an important issue. I don't want to make light of it. It's something we take very seriously in terms of how we do things at the department. And, for everything that we're doing, an improvement for safety and reliability in the system, there's no time like right now with everything that needs to be done. So our entire enterprise is focused on squeezing out everything we can and getting it out on the roads. That's what we're here to do. So if there are any questions, I'd love to
differential you were talking about when registering a vehicle that gets good gas mileage versus one that doesn't? Would that just be at point of purchase, or would that be
That's an
with personal
annual.
property tax kind of?
Yeah, the registration fee is an annual process. So, you know, typically about 90% of vehicle owners pay $24.75 a year
For the
now
tax?
for the tax. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Is there any consideration being given to a new approach to a tax of some kind for roads?
Well, this conversion that we're talking about is one of the things that's being considered because, you know, what it does is doesn't really bring more revenue in, but it counteracts the loss of gas tax as fuel economy goes up. So it's addressing one of those issues. I think it's really gonna be up to the policymakers in the state. One of the things that we have done a lot more since I've been here is really talk about the fact that as a department, as an executive branch department, tax policy is actually not our responsibility. We lend information into the discussion. We try to make available with very, very much precision on what the needs of the system are. And that's really our role in our lane. It is up to the citizens of Missouri through, if tax revenue exceeds constitutional limitations that have been placed by citizens on what the legislature can do, it becomes up to the citizens of Missouri. And through the legislative process, there are potential opportunities for addressing that. But I think there's a heavy burden that our legislature feels when the public has spoken through a referendum as to be respectful of that public choice. At the same time, this is a critical issue that's costing people a lot more than fixing the problem with. So we're hopeful. I've talked to the incoming legislative team. We just, what was it, yesterday? I guess it was. We were up in, or 2 days ago, it was up in Louisiana, Missouri. We're replacing the Champ Clark Bridge. And we brought 56 new House of Representative members through on a tour so they could see firsthand what the transportation investment does. And honestly, we almost didn't get that bridge done because of permitting issues. We were within 30 days of losing a Tiger grant on obligation. If we lost that $10 million Tiger grant, we would not be replacing that bridge today. That's how tight it is. Now, if we didn't replace that bridge before the existing one, which is 90 years old, goes out of commission for safety, that's a 77-mile detour for Louisiana, Missouri, and the surrounding. It would kill that community. It would just choke it off. So the fact that we were that close is extraordinary. So major river bridges like Roachport, we have 207 of them. Major bridges over 1,000 feet in length in this state, which is the most of any state in the country on major bridges. The replacement value of those, and the ducks and the geese and everything. The replacement value of those alone is $7 billion. My asset management plan tells me, my engineers tell me that I have to replace or do major rehabilitations on 62 of those in the next 10 years. We have funding for 12.
Director, do you believe there's, you mentioned that there's not a will today on the part of the policymakers to bring another ballot issue forward. Do you think that's going to be a 2-year process or whatever? I just don't believe that the public understands how critical the issues are. When you start talking about a bridge closing Highway 70 and 3-hour delays, I don't think people understand that. And I wish there would have been some indication how critical those issues are. Do you believe the legislature will bring the gas tax forward again in a short period of time?
Well, you mentioned that, you said that I don't believe there's a will. That's not my words. For everyone in the room here.
Stay friendly with them.
No. I do, this is a prime issue across the board throughout the legislature. I do believe that there is very much a will to try to solve this. The difficulty is that the proper solution has yet to been found that is also something that can convince the public to come forward as well. So that's a really difficult issue. And it is one where really within a couple weeks of Proposition D failure, I was in St. Louis talking to the Senate Republican caucus, and there is tremendous leadership incoming. What appears to be President Pro Tem in the Senate, Dave Schatz, he has been both the House and the Senate Transportation Committee Chair, and we've spent a lot of time together on this issue, from developing from just frustration with where we are to what the solutions are, to where he co-chaired the 21st Century Transportation Task Force. That was a legislatively appointed group. I would point everyone to that report that the 21st Century Transportation Task Force wrote. It's really a thoughtful review of where we are, why we're here, and about a decade's worth of potential public policy maneuvers to solve the problem. That report has it all laid out. This measure on the conversion of the registration fee from taxable horsepower to miles per gallon is one of the recommendations of the report. The first recommendation was an immediate increase to catch up to inflation of the gas tax. And a lot of people even said on that, it's not enough to solve the problem. We agree it was not, but as a critical first step, just removing that loss of purchasing power from the last 22 years, the last time the gas tax was raised, is a sensible and reasonably sized approach. We don't believe that there's a policy solution that actually will pay for, in a decade's time, what 30 years of deferred maintenance built in terms of unfunded needs. And it would be difficult to ask current ratepayers to do that, because that would be something like a 35-cent gas tax increase, and certainly 10 cents didn't pass, staggered over 4 years. We know that something of that size wouldn't. Yes, sir.
One of the big causes of it not passing, talking to a lot of people, I've been working on this for a long time, is that it was the perception that the money was going to the highway patrol. And you kind of blame that on the legislator. People say, I heard a lot of people, well, I don't want to get a ticket because it's going to the highway patrol, but we need maybe something like a lockbox where it just goes to road and bridges only, and it might get there. And I do know this will be my 10th year going to the legislature. They can raise the gas tax 2 cents without a vote of the people. They just get on with it.
That sounded like a statement, not a question. So I'll leave that right on the table.
So, over time, when you've gone after increased funding, you've had advocacy groups like the chambers you mentioned, when everybody here is active with the chamber. What would you like to see from groups like this, now that there isn't that measure, but what would you like to see that we can help get that message out and build the kind of support you're looking for?
I think what we've been doing is working. It hasn't been long enough, I suppose. But one of the things, not to discount, I appreciate your comments. I know these things get kind of boring, so I try to mix them up a little. 700,000 more Missourians voted in favor of an increase for transportation investment on November 6th than back in 2014 on Amendment 7. There were only 408,000 people that voted favorably for that, and now 1.1 million people voted favorably for this. Truly, even though certainly acknowledge the confusion on the ballot language, that confusion on the ballot language confirmed the no vote for people that were going to vote no matter what it was. In my opinion, and that's kind of borne out by what the pollsters have brought forward subsequent to the vote. We get swept into a national political construct with a national senatorial race with over $100 million of ad buy in St. Louis and Kansas City and throughout the state. That campaign that had been formed had no chance of scratching into that and being able to get the word more solidly out there. And there, in the last decade, there has been no proposition, I believe, that required more than 1 million yes votes to favorably pass. So this was an interesting election. There was national politics at play, and that kind of swept over it. I think that the confusion on the ballot confirmed for many people that are concerned about whether they can trust government, But I will say that there already is a lockbox. It's called the State Road Fund. And Article 4, Section 30B. Is that right, Dave? Does that sound good? Article 4, Section 30B. I almost said Article 30, Section 4B. So Article 4, Section 30B actually gives us the formula within a lockbox of the road fund. And it simply says that with user fees collected for this purpose, first call is the cost of collection to the Department of Revenue. That's capped at 3% since Amendment 3 back in 2004. That's about $20 million a year. The next call is for the enforcement of motor vehicle laws. And the enforcement of motor vehicle laws is our partner out there, the Missouri State Highway Patrol. We work with them every day, and it's a reasonable nexus within the state road fund to consider that as a use of that fund. Now, they are capped at their actual cost of enforcement, and that's audited every year. That's spelled out in the Constitution. So that is a budget act that comes on. So essentially, whatever flows through that waterfall ends up as available for road and bridge investment and the work that we do to operate, maintain, and construct the system. So that same waterfall, in effect, what the legislature did was use the Constitution the way it is written and as it's spelled out by the people. And it added money to the state road fund. It supported the highway patrol in a way that also created an investment in road and bridges. I understand that's not a 30-second ad that's easy to communicate throughout. But I think it was really sensibly and thoughtfully considered when, quite frankly, a straight gas tax was on the cutting room floor in the last legislative session and wasn't getting out of the building. That was an attempt by some really well-intentioned lawmakers, and that's why I'm hopeful that in this coming session, with that and building on that, maybe there are some solutions that will come forward. Yes, sir.
So I have a federal and a local question. At the federal level, at the beginning of the Trump administration, there was a lot of emphasis that seemed to be put on public-private partnerships as far as emphasis for funding and what that looked like moving forward. Has that tone changed or that direction changed? And if not, what is the state have any kind of designs on what we can do in response to that? And then at the local level with Prop D failing, a lot of our growth, Columbia's grown tremendously, so there's a lot of growth out in the county, and the lettered number highways that feed into Columbia have much more increased traffic and maintenance and all those issues. What does that look like for some of that over the next couple of years?
Yeah, good questions. Certainly an emphasis there. I testified a year ago, October, before Congressman Graves' subcommittee, Transportation and Investment Committee, and there was a lot of debate about the public-private partnership back and forth. And there is certainly a place for those types of investments where you have infrastructure that actually generates revenue, toll roads, that sort of thing. And there are a lot of states that have those. Every time, as a matter of fact, I think I'm legislatively bound not to say the word, so we'll call it, I don't know, pick a different word than tolling. We'll call it the egg, because I don't think I'm supposed to say the word toll. But you have to have a revenue-generating facility, and you have to have the traffic volume that actually can generate enough money to be favorable for a private concessionaire to come in, make money at the same time. In some cases, that can help accelerate the construction program, and for certain aspects of the infrastructure, that works out pretty well. If you look at that on a nationwide basis, kind of wild estimates favorably is maybe between 10 and 15% of the infrastructure fit that type of criteria. And it's probably a little bit less in Missouri, and certainly with constitutional boundaries on whether or not we could impose tolls, really not as significant. We're looking at some of the things more on, potentially on waterways, some of the other investments there. But the work beyond that, and I think the incoming T&I Chairman DeFazio, Democrat from Oregon, holds a similar thought that there's a place for the P3, and we want to encourage that. We have kind of tilted into that with what we use on innovative procurement called design build. So we don't fully design something, we actually put a design competition out for really complicated projects that we do. And the designers actually compete with design and construction. We've found huge value in we're now on our 14th design build project that has saved over $300 million for Missourians with the projects that we've completed so far and those that are underway. Good use for that. What we find on the secondary system is conditions that are not as great as the primary system, and we have limited resources to address that. So, you know, it's going to require state resources and federal resources, and probably one of the things we do well here in the state is we've reinvigorated our cost share program so that local communities can actually can bring resources to bear and combine that even on the state system. You know well here that a lot of state system roads, the primary beneficiaries are Columbia in terms of their use. So in many cases, I think probably St. Charles County is a really good example of a community that has invested heavily on the state system with their local taxation because they are prime beneficiaries of the economic development that comes with that. So we have those things available. We have a state infrastructure bank as well. So we're trying to coordinate and work with communities on that basis. And this past year, for every dollar we put into cost share, we had projects that brought an additional about $1.50 local money to the table, and we were able to get some projects done that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Yes, sir.
I know a number that's kind of thrown around a lot is we have the 7th largest system in the nation. I also know that we are only 15th in vehicle miles traveled in Missouri. So has the difficult discussion, or where is the difficult discussion on making our miles of road match more our actual need or vehicle miles traveled? To use your housing analogy, if I have a 15-room house, but I can really only afford a 5-room house, it's time for me to think real hard about possibly downsizing. And so,
Sure.
I guess.
Sure. Well, you know, from our perspective, from my perspective, I look at that a little bit on a, you know, back in the 1950s and 60s, Missourians actually increased the gas tax to expand the system to take, because local communities were having trouble developing the infrastructure to support agriculture and rural communities. And at the time, Missourians raised the gas tax 50% to do so. That 50% raise, now that was 1 penny because it went from 2 to 3 cents, but still, you know, proportionally, it was still a major investment. Now, if we did that and we took that approach, we have economies of scale at the state system, pushing a component piece back to the local level. Communities that maintain aspects of the system are not generally today equipped to handle it. Most of the community roads, county roads, and local roads, a good many of those are gravel and would be turning back paved roads to counties who don't have the equipment to maintain that. They don't have the purchasing power to do it. It would cost local taxpayers more than it costs us at the state level to maintain those. That's a debate for policymakers. I understand we end up with whatever size and construct of the system that gets laid out. To me personally, it feels a bit of a defeatist approach that our parents and grandparents with the constraints that they had figured this out. And our response today to the policy issue is to give up. I do look at it that way. Some people really get upset with me when I say it that way. But simply put, we would just be shifting the tax burden from collectively the state to individual communities. And keep in mind that we maintain at the state system level 34,000 miles of road and about 10,400 bridges. Communities, counties, and locals maintain an additional 97,000 miles of road and an additional 14,000 bridges. We have 133,000 miles of road in the state of Missouri. And those roads, they connect the entire state to the rest of the country, not even just Missouri. So retaining the connections that we have by the means that we need to, it's obviously, it's always worth considering how that works. But you I can guarantee you, and we're looking at this in great detail, because as that comes up, we try to look at that. We spend a lot more money per mile and per mile driven on the primary roads than we do on the secondary roads. We use a lot of our maintenance forces to kind of patch those right now. We're not really paving those the way people would like them to be. But our conditions for the travel are kind of reasonable. They're not where the public would like them, but it's a debate that's ongoing, and it's a legitimate policy question, and it's really one for policymakers to focus on. For me, my task is at hand. I don't get to choose. One of the things we have done though is when we're doing expansions, a lot of the agreements we come up to now are that if there are local functioning roads in addition to something we've expanded, we're generally coming to agreements where there's a conversion back to the local on a kind of a project by project basis. And that way we've got community buy-in while we're doing it. We're not growing the system beyond that which we can maintain.
Just real fast, because I know we need to wrap up. More of a statement than it is a question. I just wanted to say thank you and how much we appreciate as a chamber and our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee about how much David and Mike do to partner with the Columbia Chamber, but also our community. And so a big appreciation to all that they do for us, and thank you for allowing that.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. One last
One more. I remember you speaking here, it's been maybe a couple of years ago, Mr. McCormick reminded me. I appreciate some of the innovations that you put forward, pavement technology and other things. I remember that talk. I know we've got budgetary constraints, and I appreciate you keep preaching that, and it keeps sinking in with more and more people. We're probably not entirely alone as far as state departments of transportation around the country, maybe more acute than some others. What other things ideas that you draw from other states in this kind of, I guess your industry community, I guess, to where, where they're trying to get the most bang for their buck, or other types of innovations that way?
MoDOT's an absolute sponge for good ideas. We pull them in from anywhere in the country. There's a federal program called Everyday Counts. There have been 50 innovations that have been submitted and studied at the federal level in the last probably 7 or 8 years. Missouri DOT's implemented 49 out of 50 of those. So it's pavement technology, it's different approaches, but also Missouri DOT's pioneered a lot of those. We've done things like interchange improvements, like the diverging diamond, which actually, the big savings is we instead of the traditional clover leaves that used a lot of land, these are kind of like an inverted clover leaf. They're a little funky when you first drive through them, but essentially what they do is they eliminate the perpendicular, the T-bone and the high-speed T-bone occurrences, and there are dramatic improvements of safety. We're the #1 state in the nation that has deployed. We have over 18 of those deployed already. We've done things that with a lot of the expressways that we have throughout the state, there are still at-grade crossings which are unsafe at speeds of 60, 55, 60, 65, 70 miles an hour. And what you really need to be doing is at those crossings, you need interchanges at that to build to a higher standard to potentially raise speed limits. And what we've done also is pioneered what's called a J-turn. Not typically warmly received in a lot of places. Believe me, I have had lots of those conversations, particularly if you're trying to pull a 50-foot combine through one of them, right?
Oh.
But what they do is they eliminate fatalities. That's what they've done everywhere we've put. And we put them in places where there are fatal crashes that occur, fatal incidents. And it's so a community response, these are 10 cents on the dollar to the interchange. So that innovation is pretty substantial. We have an innovations challenge that we put forward on the operating side. So MoDOT employees actually bring these through. We do it as it's like a Shark Tank where people compete for this. We had in response to one of our employees who was fatally injured on literally out picking up trash in Kansas City on the roadway. The team that worked with her developed an automated, they call it JAWS, her name was Julie, and it's Julie's automated response vehicle what's the W stand for?
I want to say waste.
Waste. And it essentially is attached to a pickup truck with cameras in front, and you can drive, you drop the jaws down, and it scoops up the debris, and off you go. That innovative challenge, we have now funded, and we're building 32 of those, so all of our maintenance districts in the state will have access to one of those vehicles, because nobody making $14 an hour should be jeopardizing their life to pick up what somebody threw out of their window, right? So, you know, it's that type of stuff that's going on. We save money, we save lives. We are, anywhere in the country that comes up with a good idea that we can implement, we do.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.